Basically, what Allah does or what God does in terms of his punishments that he carries out himself is equivalent to the imperatives and the commands that he gives in the Bible or the Quran or any other scripture. You've conflated between the two categories.
Can he not repent? Is there any way he can repent?
No, if God doesn't select him to be saved, he can't repent from his sin. And the nature he was given by God was to be sinful.
So we have Zakir here, who, if God doesn't select him, has a sinful nature because of Adam's sin.
Is there a category distinction between an imperative that God gives to human beings to carry out versus the things that he carries out directly, or not?
So Zakir has this nature because of Adam's sin.
No thing is, unless God selects him to be saved, there's no way he can repent. That's what you're saying.
That's what the Bible says.
Right. Now, how does that reconcile with a just and merciful God?
Well,
God, we think everything is from God, yeah? But what? Yes, everything is from God. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. You don't will except that God wills, right? So we do believe that everything goes back to the will of God. That's why we say Insha'Allah, MashaAllah, all those words, meaning the will of God is always in everything, right? We do agree with that. However, pardon? Yes, everything is good and the bad, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we believe that everything goes back to the will of God. Nothing happens except through the will of God. That's not something which is, that's not a problem, because that's something which Christians also accept. In fact, especially if you go into the Calvinist school of thought, it's even more pronounced. They talk about divine predestination. Calvin wrote a whole track.
What's written down is what we're going to do in our lives, yeah? And God Almighty, Allah, knows what we're going to do in our lives.
Predictably.
Because He's all-knowing.
So just predictably, not that it's determined for you.
After seeing it. He's all-knowing.
So he learns about it. So Allah learns
So
things.
basically, basically we're given free will, yeah? And we act as according as we do. And how, as we act is what's written down.
Okay, that's one view, you realize.
But it's fine.
That's your view. Okay, fine.
Are you serious?
Fine.
So I'm just showing you why it doesn't apply. So I'm asking again. A merciful, just God. Zakir now gets a sinful nature because Adam's sin, which is no fault of his.
God, Allah is good. Yes, we believe that's an intrinsic attribute of God.
Okay, awesome.
What is evil? I take the view that evil is the lacking of good. It's deprivation. That's why I take the view. Privation.
Interesting.
That's the view that I take. That's the same view of Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim. Yes, it's a view of, that's what I'm saying, it's a view in Christianity and a view in Islam. It's not an Islam specific issue. Excuse me, let me finish. So what is evil? Evil is the lacking of good. Like for example, you've got the sun that's a shining light upon us, right? So good in this analogy would be the bright light or the rays. And evil would be the darkness that doesn't come about if there's no rays. That's my view on evil. So in other words, if you're asking me the question, does evil come from God? In one sense, of course it does, because God is responsible for all things that exist. But evil doesn't exist in my worldview. That's the point. Do you understand? Evil doesn't exist as a substrate. You can't put evil under a microscope. So going back to the point, if you're asking a question about does evil exist, so I'm saying to you, there are theodicies in Islam and Christianity, both religions, which have different ideas. Within Islam, there's different ideas. Within Christianity, there's different ideas on evil and theodicy. This is not a point where you could basically have a different view to me and be in my religion, and you can have the same view and be in the same different religion. It's not a point that differentiates Christian from Muslim. Do you understand the point? What I'm responding to you by saying is, what you done is a category mistake fallacy. What you done when you were talking to the other guy was you're saying that it's the same if God carries out a punishment himself as it is if he commands it. I'm saying no, that's not. That's a category mistake fallacy. You are able to see and demarcate and distinguish between the two categories. If God tells me to go and not eat pork, for example, or not have sexual intercourse before marriage, that's a command. Do you understand? Whereas if he drowns people because they were disobedient, that's him carrying out judgment. I see a differentiation. Yes, both of them go back to...
I'm trying to understand this idea of a merciful God giving me, I'll give me example now, not selecting me.
When I say will of God, when I say will, I'm talking about the ability to choose A over B. I'm talking about the choice of God. I'm talking about the permission of God. That's what I'm talking about. The will of God. God can decide A over B. God can decide this or that. That's what God can decide. That tree can be green, it can be blue. That's the will of God. It's the will of God. It's in accordance with the will of God that the tree is green. It's not accordance with the will of God that it's blue. It's not blue. So nothing can be, is my postulation, nothing can be except through the will of God. That's my view. And that's the view of the vast majority of Christian scholars and the vast majority of Jewish scholars and the vast majority of theists generally.
I don't know the whole of Ezekiel, but I'm saying to you in the verse where in Ezekiel where God says, turn to me in repentance and sin will not be your downfall. Right, so God saying,
We have something called irada shar'iyya and irada kawniyya, which is like you got the cosmological will and you have the legislative will.
Okay,
Do you understand?
I've heard about this.
Okay, so this is the cosmological will is what God allows to happen in the universe.
Okay.
Whereas the shara'i or legislative will is
what other
that God
things
instructs,
need to do.
instructs people to do, and as a result of Him instructing people to do that thing, okay, they either do it or not with their free will. Now, as I say, we believe in free will. Me and you both believe in free will as a concept.
But he's giving no way out. But he's giving no way out. Where's the justice?
Excuse me, there is no desire for a way out. You see, what you understand about grace in Christianity is it is a powerful act of God where He takes out that heart of stone and gives a heart of flesh.
Right.
It is an extension of His divine power. Right. It takes rebel sinners who are suppressing His knowledge and turns them from God haters into God lovers.
So there's a selection. Who selects? No one wants God.
Yes, it's called goodwill. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 6.
Right. So, for example,
It's not based on anything that I do.
no, that's what I'm saying. So why are you going to pray for him then?
Why am I preaching? Because God changes my heart to be used as an instrument of grace in His life.